Welcome into another edition, a live edition, a day early. Don Callahan's so important, you're getting him a day early. It's the Noon Dish, sponsored by Johnny T-Shirt, and of course these football shows, sponsored by Big Game USA. As I always do on these, check out the video.
You think you know North Carolina? It's not just the Smoky Mountains and the Old Well. This is Kenan Stadium, where the Jordan Fly Elite game ball makes its debut and its homecoming. Born to fly, built for Carolina, snag your Carolina Blue today.
Snag your Carolina Blue today. That is the official game ball of the North Carolina Tar Heels. They'll be playing with that ball this season, the 2025 season, starting against TCU on Labor Day. Link in the chat. No, excuse me. Link in the description. Link at the end of the video. All the good things. Get that ball. It's a good gift. If you've got kids graduating from high school or college or whatever, it might be a good gift for them. So check.
Or if you know a guy named Don and you want to get him a ball.
Yeah, Don needs some new toys, I reckon. Don, just for full disclosure, is on baby duty. So shout out to the 55 plus people that are in the chat. If Don disappears, it's because he's chasing a baby. And a baby is now mobile. I have seen steps being taken. So should be an interesting show here. Don, the portal is closed, but I'm going to ask you a question because I'm confused. The portal is closed for undergraduates, correct?
Correct.
If I graduate on May 10th when North Carolina graduates, am I allowed to get in the portal at any time?
That's a very, very good question. I would think you could. I would have to double check, but I would think that you could do that. So that's an interesting sort of way to kind of look at it. So yeah, and everyone's probably looking at this like, oh, there's another opportunity to add a bunch of players. If you know that you wanted to enter the portal, you probably would have just made it easy and just done it during the spring window. I don't see what the benefit would be to waiting. I think in most situations you would just do so in that portal window, because then the opportunities are greater also.
Yeah, absolutely. So transfer portal closed. North Carolina's added a few. I got a text earlier, like 30 minutes ago, that they had added somebody else. I want you to talk about that. Will Osteen. And also on the board, there's a portal commitment from a Gannon Burt, a long snapper. When will it slow down, Don? This
it feels
is
like
fast
it never
and
will.
furious.
I think for me overall, and I'm including the high school recruiting, maybe it slows down in July and August. And, as we've learned, if you follow recruiting, the season, there's not a whole lot going on. There's definitely visits, but as far as commitments and actual movement in recruitments, it's more foundational during the season. So it's not as crazy as it is now, and it's a little bit more organized as far as like when things are happening during the season. So it will slow down a little bit then also. But I think, right now the portal, finishing up with the portal, May will be a little slow, and then boom, we have June, which is going to be really big for the high school recruiting.
Yeah, your audio. I know we had audio issues before, but it's a little crunchy. I don't know if it bothers folks, but I noticed it. So not sure exactly what's going on. You usually sound perfectly clear. But anyway, if anybody has complaints with it, contact the internet bosses. And I don't know who they are.
Put a message in the chat if there is anything. I did kind of slam my arm down, so maybe you heard a little bit of that.
It sounds fine to me at times, but
okay.
Anyway, let's talk about a couple of these commitments. Obviously, North Carolina got a few. This is still a function of the speed dating, correct?
Yes.
Guys go in, guys commit. Tell us a little bit about Will Osteen, another big. The article says experienced offensive lineman. Tell me about him.
Yeah, it's hard to kind of talk about him and not look towards his experience. He's started every game for Jacksonville State the past 3 seasons at left tackle. And this past season ended with him receiving first team all CUSA conference recognition. The season prior, he was honorable mention for all conference. So and this is a guy that has a lot of experience, particularly in a run first offense, which is what Rich Rod ran at Jacksonville State before he left to go back to his alma mater, West Virginia. So yeah, so I mean, he's a guy who is definitely going to bring some experience to the room.
When you look at it, one thing that sticks out for me is he's academic All-American, and he's getting a master's in biology, above my pay grade and my brain power, knowledge-wise there. So that's a young man that brings a lot more to the table than just the football side of it. Tell me about these defensive line commitments, because that's certainly what North Carolina needed. That's certainly what North Carolina fans were hoping Carolina could get. Let's sort of highlight them.
Yeah, it's funny because we were a week ago. There really weren't any that are on the radar. We had heard some conversations and that sort of thing, and both of these guys end up visiting this past weekend and committing to North Carolina this past weekend. The one that really, a lot of these guys you look at and they appeared in like 8 games and maybe have like a start. Their stat lines aren't like super impressive, but you kind of see, well, maybe there's something that Belichick and Lombardi see in them, that maybe they're a better fit North Carolina. But, the Florida guy, DeAndre Robinson, is one that I was really kind of impressed with as far as just, what he's done so far. He has an impressive resume at Florida, but clearly, defensive line in general, as you mentioned, was a position. They saw the same film that we saw from the spring practice, and they obviously were there in the spring, so they knew that defensive tackle, the interior of the defensive line, was something that needed to be upgraded, and that's certainly what they get with these two guys over the weekend.
Yeah, so you got Robinson, you got Isaiah Johnson, two big young men that'll bring a little bit of experience, but a lot of size, and certainly, at worst, depth options at North Carolina, and probably starting options. Don, I ask this question every week, and this is, I think, the 3rd straight week we've done this. Is how many more? I mean,
yeah,
it seems like the faucet is still on.
Yeah, so I think it's starting to trickle now. So I mean, there are still a couple of guys out there that they're pursuing, and barring some special situation, nobody else should be entering. By this point, if somebody submitted their paperwork, they should be already in the portal by this point. So I think it slows down a little bit. But yeah, I mean, there's still some guys out there that North Carolina's pursuing who has hosted on visits, and I think everybody. I mean, so much can change, really. But I mean, the guys that we know about for this week, visiting wise, are all kind of out there.
Linebacker for Boise State. Everybody keeps asking about him. It's kind of like vanished into the ether.
Here's the thing. I'm in the business of, if I have information and I'm allowed to report it, I report it. So I can understand the intrigue and people asking what's kind of going on with him, but this is just the nature of the transfer portal, where information is a lot harder to come by than it is with high school recruiting, and so we're kind of at the mercy of that. A lot of situations, it's we get a heads up, 5 minutes, this guy's about to commit, and that's all we get. So I don't have anything more to report on Andrew Simpson than what we've already reported on him. That he visited last week, and he had some other visits planned.
There you go, Don Callahan. On the one name that keeps popping up on the Tar Pit Premium message boards. This is the noon dish on a Tuesday. That's Don Callahan. I'm Tommy Ashley, of course, Johnny T-shirt and Big Game USA. Don, if you had to look at this roster, and this is more of a team cover guy question, but targets, needs, what are left for needs? It feels like North Carolina has sort of filled the roster spots as far as needs, and now maybe transition into the best available. But what, from your reporting and your coverage, what areas are they still looking to add important pieces. We'll say it that way.
Yeah, so I think that, and I leaned on a guy who knows the roster better than myself when we prepared for this portal window opening in Jason Staples, and he gave us 4 position, I guess, shopping list / wish list: defensive tackle, quarterback, offensive tackle, and or was it? Yeah, or I guess it was offensive tackle, and a secondary, a complementary running back. And if we go through, North Carolina has at least signed players that fit that shopping list. Now, whether they end up being impact players or being what they need to do well this season, that remains to be seen. There are some guys that are definitely maybe some projections because they haven't done a whole lot yet in college, as I kind of alluded to earlier. But there's some guys like Gio Lopez who certainly have done plenty at South Alabama who are coming into North Carolina, and it's just a matter of seeing if that transitions to the ACC. As you can hear, my guy, he's when he first wakes up from a nap, he's in a good mood. So I'm hoping that lasts a long time, but there might be a point where I need to grab him and bring him on here. But he's behaving right now.
Yeah, it's tough to keep them chained down once they can move around, and you got to do what you got to do. If we got to cut it short, we cut it short. But we're talking on a Tuesday, Don Daddy Daycare going on, expert recruiting, but also expert parenting. I saw the first the 1-year birthday party pictures too.
Oh, did you?
Cool. Yeah, Facebook, man. You can see everything you want to see and some things you don't want to see on there.
That's right.
But yeah, it's a great time to be alive in the Callahan household. When you mention running backs, obviously they got Hall from Michigan, but you also have McGill reclassing. Tell us about a reclass in college football. You don't see it a lot.
Yeah, and this actually, I don't know if you pulled this from one of the questions. We had some really good questions in that thread. So sometimes I look at the questions, I'm like, but these were really good questions. But the McGill question is great. And I actually spoke to him over the weekend. I think for his position in particular, it's a smart decision. And the reason being is that let me just grab and see.
You got to love live radio. And this is going to get interesting. We're going to ask him the questions and see what he thinks.
The running back position, as we know, is different than other positions because you almost have to treat it like a car, where the more mileage you have on that car, the less value it has, and the worse it performs. So he's cutting out a year of just really unnecessary mileage at the high school level. He's already kind of accomplished all he wants to accomplish. He just prior to last season, he transferred to a new school. So he's not at a school where he's been with his buddies for a long time. They want to win a state championship. It's a private school. So it's, I don't know if those aspirations are as important as if he would have stayed at like Brom High School where, challenging for a state championship would be pretty important. Yeah, so I think that it makes a whole lot of sense for him. He's ready. Anybody who's had kids in high school recently know it's actually pretty easy to graduate early because of the way that they structure the classes for kids. I mean, my kids are only taking 2 classes my daughter only took 1 class this entire year that mattered. And my son's only taken 2 this entire year that matter. So it's not that difficult to do. And there are a lot of different community colleges offer high school classes that kind of help, and they're respectable. It's not like in the past we've had some questionable academic situations. These are legitimate, usually a local community college that will give you some classes that you need so that you meet the requirements for high school graduation and also the requirements for enrollment. And so he's able to do that. I think it's a great idea. I think it's perfect for North Carolina that obviously has, we have Gauss, obviously, who is clearly the guy that we're looking towards, but we know you have to have 2 or 3 running backs that you can rely on, and then you need some good depth because that is a position where injuries do occur. So bringing in a guy that's clearly talented and clearly has the physical makeup. And this is a kid I believe he's a state champion in weightlifting. So he takes care of his body. Physically, he's ready. He just needs the experience. And I think I can't think of a negative for him at all, because I imagine he's still able to do all the other stuff. He'll miss, like, I guess his senior stuff, like senior prom, but he'll be able to do his junior prom and all that other fun stuff for the year. But I don't see a whole lot of negatives for this move for him or for North Carolina.
Yeah, and shout out to NJ Tar Heel 1 on the Tar Pit Premium message board for the question. I'll just read the question so folks will know what it was. How do you view Jalen McGill's upclassing and joining class of 25? Difficult for him to reach too deep, especially considering you've got Hall and Gauss ahead of him. So good question, good answer for Don Callahan. This show will go as far as these questions, and that young man sitting in Don's lap will let us go. Don. Question from Tar Heels Rule 44. Don was somewhat vocal about how messy things were during Bill's first few months on the job. Now that we've been through 2 transfer portal windows and several weekends chock full of visitors, what is Don's take on how things are going from a recruiting standpoint, both portal and high school?
Yeah, so I think there's definitely been some improvement. I think it's more, I don't know if streamlined is a word I would use, but just more, I guess, directional with a lot of things. I think that just kind of looking back, there clearly was a learning curve for this staff. And I think the learning curve is still ongoing, but obviously we're learning a whole lot more in January than they are learning now in April. And that's clear by if you kind of look back on certain things. So I think that was a problem that kind of led to the quote unquote mess that the 44 used, the term that he used. Also, I think that the lack of having a full coaching staff really made things difficult unnecessarily for them in January. And we mentioned that as a potential problem. And I think in hindsight it was, if you talk to some of the recruits afterwards, after visits, they wanted to know who's going to be coaching them. They wanted to be, spending time with their position coaches. And during some of those earlier visits, they couldn't do that. Or they were visiting with someone who might be their position coach or might not be their position coach. So there's a lot of, a lot of that I think hurt in January. And obviously I think by that February dead period, it seemed like the entire staff was kind of put in place and everybody kind of had a better understanding of the college football recruiting landscape, because it's different. It is different. I know that Lombardi has constantly compared it to free agency, but I mean, I've talked to plenty of coaches and personnel people who have worked in both pro and college, and they'll tell you that college recruiting, particularly high school recruiting, is way different. There's a lot more of butt kissing and loving up and all of that just doesn't go on in free agent recruiting. So I think, to answer his question, I think it's gotten better. I could point to a lot of different areas where I think that they could improve or adjust. But I think it's going better now. But yeah, there's still some room for improvement.
Fair question. Shout out Tar Heels Rule 44 for the question. Moving on down the list, Maxim RNB1, can you speak to the scholarship limit of 85 versus 105? It seemed Carolina was going to be well over 85. Now it's not really looking that way. What is your opinion on that?
Yeah, so I think what would be good, I'm glad you asked this question, because I think what would be good is explain the situation, because I feel like so many people are misunderstanding where we're at with this. As of today, right now, the scholarship limit is 85, right? But you can have as many players on roster as you want, as long as only 85 of them are on scholarship. And so typically North Carolina has had like 120-ish. But reading up on this stuff, there's some teams that have like 150, and there's some that go under 100. And obviously over that 85 are all walk-ons. And some schools rely on their walk-ons a lot more than others. And so that's why with some of the heartache over this stuff is, with the scholarship limit. Now, the 105 is a scholarship cap that is part of the House First NCAA settlement, which received, I guess it was it not a preliminary approval back in the fall, but not final approval. And so that doesn't go into place until that I guess it's a lawsuit is signed by Judge Wilkins back in California. And one of the holdups is actually the scholarship situation, to where they had a hearing about a month ago where she kind of expressed some concerns about the scholarship caps and told both parties to go back to the drawing board on that. And they came back, I don't know, it was a week later or so, saying, hey, we talked, we can't fix it. And she wasn't too happy with that response and fired back and said, if you don't fix it, you're not going to get approval here. So we have yet to hear back from the NCAA or I guess the plaintiffs in this lawsuit on what they're going to do or how they're going to handle it. So right now we're kind of in limbo on what's going to happen. Now, the SEC, which always seems to understand these things better than everybody else, they knew that this was going to be a mess. And so they already said the 2025 season, everybody must be 85 scholarships or less, just to kind of keep it simple so that everybody knew how they were operating. So I don't know if North Carolina is trying to get underneath 85. I think that would be a wise decision because we just don't know what's going to happen here. And you don't want to get into the situation where you're forcing to cut kids in August. I don't think anybody wants to. I would hope nobody wants to get into that situation. But if I was advising a school, I would tell them you want to probably stay as close to the 85 as possible, just in case this doesn't pass. Because I mean, there is right now, there's no end in sight for this situation.
Yeah, once stuff gets tied up in the courts, who knows what's going to happen. Shout out to the 170 in the live chat. We are answering questions off the Tar Pit Premium message boards and questions in the live chat if you have them. I'll get to those in a second. But rolling on down, Ray Ram on the message board. I remember Don stating the spring portal had a lot less top players than the winter portal, and therefore UNC was unlikely to sign more than a few in the spring. Has the spring surprised you, Don?
I think what has surprised me is the amount of outgoing from North Carolina, which has created more space for incoming. You know how it is. We get a lot of phone calls from people who are angry. I've been fielding these sort of phone calls for years, months, decades. I'm talking about overall. Yeah. And I have learned that, especially when someone says, hey, this is off the record or this is between you and I, it sometimes can turn into a venting session. And after a few times of hearing a parent or even a player kind of vent to you and this and that, and then see them playing, suiting up the next season, you kind of think, all right, this is just how it is. This year, obviously, we received a lot of that, but there were some guys who were clearly unhappy who definitely entered the portal. And there were some who, I guess, were able to kind of talk off the ledge there. But yeah, so I didn't anticipate the amount of guys that went into the portal that did, particularly guys who I kind of thought were going to be, key parts of this program this coming season, and that kind of contributed. I mean, the point still remains. I think if we were to lay it out and dissect both the winter and the spring portal, the winter portal is way more talented, way deeper. Are there exceptions? Sure, there are definitely exceptions, like the Nico Amaleva situation, but you can't count on that every year. And even when that happened, a lot of schools were like, thanks, but no thanks, just because of the baggage that's connected with it. So I am a little bit surprised by the outgoing and which resulted in the larger amount of incoming for for UNC.
Yeah, space became available, and North Carolina needed to fill them. Let's go through these questions. Let me look at one from the Eric Miller funny question. You guys scared me. Wednesday is garbage day, so when I got the alert, I thought I'd forgotten to take the trash out. You can always take it out a day early, so Eric, you're good there. Cold ascending question for Don: is national recruiting approach causing any grumblings from the North Carolina high school coaches, or is it too early to tell? And I'll piggyback that question on TAS 0417. Can you hear me even over there?
Yeah.
Why is Carolina not resonating with so many in-state recruits? Not a lot of emphasis. Is it too late? Do you think it's just a class deal, or case-by-case basis? And this might be our last question.
Yeah, hold on. Let me see. Let me grab one more time.
This is live. While Don's doing that, let me do this. Johnny T-Shirt and JohnnyT-Shirt.com, sponsors of the show, great friends of Inside Carolina, great friends of you, the Inside Carolina Premium subscriber. Go check them out on Franklin Street. Go check them out in person there. And if you can't get there, go to Johnny T-Shirt online. They may even have stuff for Kobe size to wear at Johnny T-Shirt. National Guys Pay the Bills. Will come right back for the wrap of Noon Dish. Okay, Don, the in-state question.
Yeah. This always gets the in-state guys in trouble because, God forbid, they try to advocate for their own players. I think that the way North Carolina is recruiting in general is different, and I think it's having different results. And I think that we notice it a lot more in-state because we're more familiar with those guys. When an in-state guy doesn't list North Carolina's top schools list, that resonates more with the fan base because they're more familiar with that guy as opposed to a kid in Alabama who maybe he's visited a couple times, but if he doesn't have North Carolina in his top schools list, less fans know about him, so it's not that big of a deal. But I think that there is just a different way that they're approaching recruiting, and it's and it's having like a different effect. And I think the swinging for the fences stuff hasn't really paid dividends yet. It's gotten a lot of kids on campus, but go back and look in January, go back and look in, I was just actually looking at that UNC Duke basketball game visit list, and you'd be surprised by how many of those guys took those tickets and we never heard from them from North Carolina. Like a good bit of those, I'm talking about the national guys. Now, it definitely helped them with, kind of securing, although I think it was on track for what is his name? The defensive tackle that committed from Mount Olive. North Dukeland. Ruffin committing, kind of sealed the deal there, although that was on track to commit anyway. And there's a couple other guys that I think it helped with, but really a lot of the national guys who weren't really even interested in North Carolina to begin with were like, all right, thanks for these UNC Duke basketball tickets. And so I think, I don't know, that bringing those guys on campus really hasn't paid a whole lot of dividends. But obviously when if you're a high school coach in North Carolina and you haven't seen a UNC coach, and then you see UNC's visiting schools in Massachusetts, you're like, hey, what's going on here? So yeah. But I definitely don't want to say anyone's griping. I have asked a lot of people's opinions on things, actually almost all of them are coaches with legitimate Power 5 players. I had a conversation with one last week, has a bunch of Power 5 players on his roster. So, I think they're taking notice of certain things, and it's just a different approach. And people are asking me, is it just more of a focus on the portal? And maybe that's the case. But, I guess it just remains to be seen what kind of happens.
Indeed, it's complicated. We'll put it that way. Therish Hill asked in the chat, and I can answer this one, how much of portal recruitment is strictly about money, a bidding war, Playing time must play a role in some transfer recruitments. Does development, superior coaching count at all? Don, portal has been predominantly transactional, correct?
I would say it's very transactional. I don't know if I say predominantly. I was actually reading an article that was quoting some agents off the record, and it talked about how a lot of their guys actually were entering the portal for better opportunities. If you look at the guys that North Carolina is bringing in, a lot of them, let's just take Gio Lopez, is playing at North Carolina, playing at a Power 4 school as opposed to playing at South Alabama, a better opportunity for him? I think so. Now, is whatever money that was offered nice? Sure. But then you look at some of these other, like we talked about the Robinson kid who was at Florida. You would think that Florida is a school that could definitely kind of pay for a kid like that, but sees better opportunity to get on the field at North Carolina. The kid that transferred, the Bayer kid, Mekhi Bayer, who transferred, he played in Nebraska, spent the spring at Missouri, and then transferred out of Missouri and ends up in North Carolina. And there's a very good chance he's a starter for North Carolina or seeing significant snaps. I mean, yeah, I'm sure the money is nice, but it's a better opportunity for him in North Carolina. If you read some of the stuff from the Missouri site, even before he entered the portal, it was talk about how he kind of fell down the depth chart a little bit. So now he's going into a situation that at linebacker, North Carolina clearly needs some help because of some of their departures. So we can go down the list on and on and on. There is definitely some, money is definitely playing a role. I'm not saying that. I will say that about high school, but about portal recruiting, money is definitely playing a role, especially when you're talking about some of these bigger kids. But there are a lot of kids who are using it as an opportunity to get a better opportunity for themselves on the football field.
Indeed, another interesting question because, everybody thinks when a player goes a different school or a different route, whether it's basketball recruiting or football recruiting, is because they offered him a bigger bag. And so he went somewhere else.
And that definitely happens. And it happens a lot more in portal recruiting. So I'm not saying it doesn't happen. That definitely happens. But I do think if you're a kid like the other, what was the other one from the Joseph, I don't even pronounce his last name, the Mpoy kid. We were talking to some guys I know who cover Penn State, and they mentioned that it's just a situation where he's not going to get on the field at Penn State, and so because they're just so deep at the position, and they try to actually move him around. He came in as an edge rusher. They beefed him up, tried to move him inside. That didn't really work out. I'm really curious to see what North Carolina does. Do they continue the transition inside? Do they move him outside? That sort of thing. But yeah, but there are definitely guys who definitely go in places because, this school's paying me this school's paying me that.
Yeah, Don Callahan clearly knows about money. He's got a bunch of it, folks. He's got it stacked all in behind those. Somebody in the chat asked, does Kobe know how to say Phillies yet? What was his first words?
He hasn't really. He just yells.
So definitely a Phillies fan. And anything left, and I'll let you get out of here. I know you've got to do that. And Carolina has a baseball game at 4 o'clock today that I need to get to. But shout out to 187 people currently in the chat, and it's always awesome that you guys join us, especially on short notice for a Tuesday. But anytime folks take their lunch breaks, or if they're retired like some of us are, they can just spend time with us, Don. But anything left you think is important here on the Noon Dish today?
No, just that you're plenty of content coming out on coverage on all these sort of things. We might have some additional stuff on Gio Lopez, who we touched on earlier, come on at some point soon. High school recruiting is going to start to pick up. It'll slow down a little bit in May, but it will start to pick up towards the end of May and into June, as I mentioned earlier. So definitely pay attention to that stuff. And yeah, I think that's basically it. All I can think about at this point.
a truncated noon dish, but definitely chock full of information. Shout out to Don Callahan and Kobe Callahan for joining in the show. You can't have live shows without awesome interactions, but that's Don Callahan. I'm Tommy Ashley. Johnny T-Shirts our sponsor, and check out Big Game USA to get your official game ball of the North Carolina Tar Heels. Everybody stay safe. We will see you next time. Thanks, Don.
Thanks, Tommy.